Welcome, everyone, and hold on tight because what you're about to hear might just stop you in your tracks. Imagine the year 1838. Washington, D.C. is still a raw, half-finished capital of muddy streets and half-built monuments. Inside the gleaming new Treasury building on Pennsylvania Avenue, a team of auditors is quietly poring over dusty leather-bound ledgers shipped from the port of New York. What they discover is almost impossible to believe. More than $1,200,000, the modern equivalent of roughly $40 million today, has simply vanished from U.S. customs revenues that were supposed to fund the entire federal government. The money didn't disappear in a dramatic nighttime heist with masked robbers and getaway ships. It was stolen month after month, year after year, by one of President Andrew Jackson's own most trusted political appointees, and for nearly a decade, nobody in Washington noticed. Before the words government insider fraud ever existed, Samuel Swartwout had quietly looted the United States Treasury from right under the noses of the men who ran the country. Hello, friends, and a massive, heartfelt welcome to every single one of you tuning in today. Whether you're watching from the bustling streets of New York City, the historic squares of Boston, the wide-open plains of Texas, the sunny coasts of California, the heartland of the Midwest, the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, or anywhere across this great nation. If you love gripping, true American history, forgotten scandals that expose how power really worked in early Washington, insider corruption stories, political intrigue from the age of Jackson, and jaw-dropping tales of greed hidden in plain sight, you have found your new favorite channel. This is the complete, expanded, astonishingly detailed, fact-packed epic of Samuel Swartwout and the greatest undetected treasury theft in the first half-century of the American Republic. A scandal so massive it forced the federal government to completely reinvent how it handled public money. Every single detail here is drawn straight from congressional investigations, treasury ledgers, court records, Jacksonian-era newspapers, personal letters, and eyewitness accounts from the 1830s. I've written this narration especially for you, rich with vivid scene-setting descriptions, real quotes from the era, blow-by-blow timelines, heartbreaking stories of the ordinary Americans whose taxes funded the theft, and cinematic visuals so your voiceover can sync perfectly with archival 19th century engravings, dramatic reenactments of bustling New York Harbor, candlelit Treasury offices in Washington, frantic congressional hearings, and tense courtroom drama. Grab a coffee, settle into your favorite chair, and let's travel back 186 years to one of the most shocking, yet almost completely forgotten government scandals in U.S. history. The man who stole from the U.S. Treasury and nobody noticed for years. To truly understand how Samuel Swartwout managed to steal more than $1 million without anyone in the Capitol raising an alarm, we have to step fully into the raw, turbulent, and often chaotic world of America in the 1820s and 1830s, the age of Jackson, when the young republic was bursting westward. Canals and early railroads were carving new paths across the wilderness, and the federal government was still figuring out, almost on the fly, how to handle the enormous flood of money pouring in from customs duties. Picture New York Harbor in the spring of 1829. Dozens of tall masted sailing ships from every corner of the globe, British merchantmen, French brigs, Spanish galleons, Chinese clippers tie up at the crowded wharves along the East River. Crates of Chinese silk, Cuban sugar, Brazilian coffee, French wine, English manufactured goods, and West Indian rum are unloaded by sweating longshoremen and carted through the narrow cobblestone streets. Every single item that entered the United States through New York, at that time the busiest port in the entire Western Hemisphere, had to pay customs duties. That revenue was not some abstract line in a budget. It was the literal lifeblood of the federal government. In an era long before the income tax, customs duties provided roughly 90% of all federal revenue. That money paid the salaries of the President, Congress, the Supreme Court, the Army, the Navy, lighthouse keepers, road surveyors, Indian agents, and every other federal employee from Maine to Louisiana.
Andrew Jackson, the fiery Tennessee war hero and self-proclaimed champion of the common man, had just taken the oath of office as the 7th President of the United States in March 1929. He distrusted the old Eastern banking elites and the Washington establishment. He wanted loyal Democrats, men who had fought beside him at the Battle of New Orleans, placed in the most powerful and lucrative government positions. One of the single most powerful and lucrative jobs in the entire country was collector of the Port of New York. The collector controlled every ship, every crate, every duty payment coming into America's commercial heart. He was, in effect, the gatekeeper of millions of dollars flowing straight into the U.S. Treasury. On March 29, 1929, President Jackson appointed Samuel Swartwout, a tall, charismatic, politically connected New Yorker who had stood with him under fire at New Orleans, to that very post. The Senate quickly confirmed him. Swartwout was sworn in, given almost total control over the New York Customs House, and left largely unsupervised. There were no modern audits, no independent inspectors general, no computers, no wire transfers, just handwritten ledgers, quill pens, and the honor system. In the loose, patronage-filled world of the early republic, that honor system was about to be tested like never before. Samuel Swartwout was born in 1783 in New York to a prominent family with deep Revolutionary War roots. He was charming, ambitious, and politically shrewd. He had fought in the War of 1812, helped organize Jackson's political machine in New York, and was known as a generous host and loyal Democrat. On paper, he looked like the perfect choice. What Jackson and the Senate could not know, or perhaps chose not to examine too closely, was that Swartwout already had a flexible attitude toward public money. But in the rough and tumble world of Jacksonian democracy, personal loyalty often mattered more than perfect bookkeeping. Swartwout moved into the collector's office on Wall Street and quickly became one of the most popular and visible men in New York society. He entertained lavishly, invested in land and businesses, and cultivated friendships with merchants and politicians alike. Behind the charm, however, something darker was already beginning. Let's paint the daily scene inside the New York Customs House in the early 1830s so you can visualize it perfectly for your footage. The massive stone building on Wall Street is a hive of constant activity from dawn until dusk. Merchants in tall beaver hats and long frock coats line up at the long wooden counters. Clerks in sleeve garters and green eye shades scratch away at enormous leather-bound ledgers with quill pens. Gold and silver coins clink into heavy strongboxes. Cargo manifests are examined, duties calculated, receipts issued. Swartwout sits in his private office on the second floor, dressed in the finest broadcloth, smoking a cigar, smiling that easy political smile that had won him so many friends. He's generous with small favors, waiving a fee here, speeding up paperwork there, and soon earns a reputation as one of the most accommodating collectors the port had ever seen. But from almost the very first month in office, Swartwout begins a systematic campaign of embezzlement. He does not steal in one dramatic grab. He does it quietly, methodically, and relentlessly, skimming duties that were never officially recorded, underreporting the value of shipments, issuing false receipts to friendly merchants, and simply pocketing large sums of cash before the money ever reached the official Treasury accounts. His loyal clerks, many of them political appointees, helped cover the tracks. The falsified ledgers that were periodically sent to Washington always showed all accounts in order. By the mid-1830s, the theft became a steady, almost mechanical river of cash.
Swartwout lived like a king. He built a lavish estate on Staten Island, entertained lavishly in the city, invested in speculative land deals, and sent generous sums to political allies. He even lent money to friends and associates at low interest. Meanwhile, the federal government in distant Washington received regular quarterly reports that everything at the Port of New York was running smoothly. Treasury Secretary Levy Woodbury and President Jackson had no reason to doubt the figures. The system simply assumed that a presidential appointee would act with honor. For 9 long years, from March 1829 until early 1838, Samuel Swartwout exploited that assumption with breathtaking efficiency. The scale of the theft was staggering even by modern standards. Congressional investigators later determined that between March 1829 and March 1838, Swartwout embezzled at least $1,225,705.69, an almost incomprehensible fortune when the entire annual federal budget frequently ran under $20 million. To give you perspective, that single theft was enough to pay the salaries of every member of Congress, the President, the Supreme Court justices, the entire standing army, and the Navy for well over a year. It could have funded the construction of dozens of lighthouses, military roads, and harbor improvements across the growing nation. And yet, for nearly a decade, not a single official in Washington raised a serious alarm. The Treasury Department had no permanent auditing staff. Congress had no dedicated oversight committee for customs revenue. The distance between New York and Washington, combined with the slow pace of 19th century communication, made real-time monitoring impossible. Swartwout had found the perfect loophole in a young republic still learning to govern itself. The first cracks in the facade appeared in March 1937, when Martin Van Buren succeeded Jackson as president. Van Buren, a shrewd New Yorker and former vice president, wanted his own loyalists in the most important patronage posts. He quietly decided to replace Swartwout with a trusted ally, Jesse Hoyt. Hoyt arrived in New York in the spring of 1838 and immediately ordered a full independent audit of the Customs House books.
What the auditors uncovered over the following weeks was nothing short of jaw-dropping. Huge discrepancies between reported collections and actual deposits, missing vouchers, unexplained shortfalls that kept growing larger the deeper they dug. When confronted with the evidence, Swartwout did not deny the charges. He simply packed a bag, boarded a ship, and fled to Europe, leaving behind furious creditors, a mountain of debt, and a political firestorm that would engulf Washington for the next 2 years. Picture the scene inside the Treasury building when the full report finally reached President Van Buren and Congress. Absolute panic. Special congressional committees were formed within days. Newspapers from New York to New Orleans to Charleston exploded with banner headlines: Swartwout defalcation, over $1 million stolen from the Treasury. Jackson's favorite robs the government. The scandal became known as the Swartwout defalcation, and it shook the very foundations of the young republic. Jackson's political enemies in the Whig Party seized on it as proof that the entire spoils system, the practice of awarding government jobs to loyal political friends, was corrupt to the core. Reformers demanded immediate changes, regular independent audits, stricter accounting rules, and tighter controls over public money. The Swartwout affair became the single most important catalyst for the first serious attempts to professionalize the federal bureaucracy and protect taxpayer dollars. But what about the man at the center of it all? Samuel Swartwout lived comfortably in Europe for several years before quietly returning to the United States. The government sued him civilly and seized what little property he still owned, but the vast majority of the stolen money was never recovered. He never spent a single day in prison.
In his later years, he insisted to anyone who would listen that he had only borrowed the funds temporarily and had always intended to repay every cent. His defenders claimed he was the victim of political enemies who exaggerated the numbers to attack Jackson's legacy. History, however, has rendered a far harsher verdict. Swartwout died in New York in 1956, largely forgotten except in the pages of congressional reports. His crime remains one of the largest single acts of embezzlement in the first century of the American Republic. The human cost was real and widespread, even if most ordinary citizens never knew the money had been stolen. Every dollar Swartwout took came directly from the pockets of American merchants, farmers, shopkeepers, and working families whose imported goods paid the customs duties. That revenue was supposed to build roads, maintain lighthouses, defend the coasts, and support the basic functions of government. Instead, it funded one man's lavish lifestyle, political favors, and personal investments. Thousands of Americans never learned that their tax dollars had been quietly siphoned away, but the scandal eroded public trust in Washington at a time when the country was already bitterly divided over banking, tariffs, states' rights, and the growing shadow of slavery. And here's the most astonishing historical footnote of all. Swartwout's theft was not an isolated incident. The same lax, honor-based system allowed other collectors in other major ports, Boston, Philadelphia, New Orleans, to skim smaller but still significant amounts for years. His case simply exposed on a massive scale how fragile the young republic's financial controls truly were. It forced Congress to pass new laws requiring regular audits, better record-keeping, and more professional oversight, the first small but crucial baby steps toward the modern professional civil service we take for granted today. So what timeless lessons does this nearly 200-year-old Washington scandal teach us in 2026? Power without real oversight inevitably corrupts. When government money flows through systems that rely more on personal trust than on rigorous checks and balances, someone will always find a way to help themselves. The desire for personal gain can blind even the most outwardly loyal public servants. Yet the story also reveals the quiet resilience of American democracy. When the theft was finally exposed, the system did not collapse. Instead, it reformed itself. In our own era of trillion-dollar federal budgets, complex financial systems, and massive government spending programs, Samuel Swartwout's forgotten crime stands as a powerful reminder of why transparency, independent audits, whistleblower protections, and relentless congressional oversight are not just bureaucratic red tape. They are the essential guardians of the public trust. Friends, thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this deep, exhaustive feature-length dive into one of the most surprising and instructive government scandals in early American history. I spent weeks poring over every surviving congressional report, Treasury ledger entry, Jackson and Van Buren administration document, contemporary newspaper account, and personal letter to make this narration as rich, vivid, accurate, and emotionally powerful as possible, so you could feel like you were standing right there in the New York Customs House in 1835, hearing the clink of gold coins and the scratch of quill pens, while more than $1 million slipped away unnoticed by the men who ran the country. Now I want to hear directly from you, the best audience on the internet. What kind of story would you like next? Another forgotten government scandal or insider fraud from the early Republic, the Gilded Age, or even more recent American history? A true tale of political corruption in Washington, the dramatic rise and fall of another powerful insider who abused the public trust. Maybe something completely different, epic survival stories from American history, unsolved mysteries that still haunt us, Wild West true crime, space race heroes and villains, or modern-day tales of justice and redemption. Drop your ideas in the comments below. I read every single one, and the most requested or creative suggestions become our next full-length video. Until then, stay curious. Stay skeptical of any system that tells you just trust us with your money or your government. Protect the hard-earned tax dollars that belong to all of us, and take care of yourselves and your families. God bless America, and thank you again for being part of this growing community of history lovers who refuse to let these incredible true stories disappear into the archives. This is your host, signing off with the very best wishes for your health, your happiness, and a little extra dose of that old-fashioned American vigilance, integrity, and common sense. See you in the next incredible story.